welcome to Michelson Alexander Explains. This is the second episode of our special COVID-19 recovery series. Today we are speaking to Paul Guerra. Paul Guerra is the CEO of the Victorian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. This is Victoria's peak business group that is made up of members of all sorts of business across Melbourne and Victoria. And it's his job to represent those interests to government and publicly. Now, he took the role on in February 2020, and he could never have imagined what was going to lay ahead. In this episode, we talk about COVID-19 recovery, the Victorian roadmap, what the restrictions have meant for business in Victoria, and how Victorian business will approach vaccine uptake. Now, usually you can see Paul on a news grab, on a 30-second news grab on TV or radio news, but in this episode we actually dig a little bit deeper and find out more about the communication that goes on between his group and also the members of his group to find a way through, which has always been one of the most controversial elements of this pandemic. So now, please welcome Paul Guerra. Thanks, Paul, for joining us. First, before we get into the detail of what you've been doing over the last 18 months or so, you started as the Chamber CEO in February 2020. You also had COVID not long after that. Is this anything like you think you'd signed up for?
No. So time is everything, all right? So you're right, February 2020. I remember talking to my president about what the role was going to be, and I had, and I still have a really good friendship with Mark Stone, and he sort of encouraged me to go through the process. And then at the other end, he said, "Oh, you'll love it." Of course, I think we had 2 normal weeks, and then this thing called COVID hit, and I was like, "Man, what is going on?" But look, we jumped in and recognised that business needed a voice, needed to be represented, and I'm fortunate that when I look at my history, it's kind of all tied into this. So 17 years with Motorola, one of the world's great multinationals in its time. It gave me a technology piece. It also gave me a sense of Asia Pacific, but importantly, some global connects. I then worked at Vodafone and got an understanding of retailers very much at that point. And then I spent 5 years as the Managing Director Asia Pacific for United Health Group, which is the largest company that no one's heard of. They're about $200 billion US annual turnover each year, 7th largest company in the world. And all they do is in health. So, and then from there, I chaired the Queen Victoria Market Board, and I was the CEO of the Rural Agricultural Society, so think Royal Melbourne Show. So that gave me the community feel, and here I was landing in a role that needed to think about the community, needed to think about small business, needed to think about medium business, large business and multinationals, and needed to think about innovation from not only technology but across the board, but then access to governments as well. And through all the roles, every part that I'd had sort of came to fruition in this role, and has been for the last 18 months. COVID was kind of just the icing on top to go through the full immersion, so that I came out the other end happily. It took me a while to recover from it. It was the sickest I've been, but it helped me understand what the virus was about. Trust me, I didn't want to get it. I still don't know how I got it, but I did. And fortunately, I've lived to tell the tale.
And I think you mentioned there your past experiences in other sectors, and there's a lot of stuff there that's about engaging with the people that you're representing. So when COVID hit, and you're obviously then responsible for putting a message out on behalf of the business community, how did you make sure from that very initial stage to right now that message is reflective of what your constituents, I guess, are thinking?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jack. And we thought a lot about this, and if we got it right, it's because of the approach that we took. So first of all, we recognised who we were representing, and we were representing our members that are paying the bills, for us to exist as an organisation. So we spent a lot of time talking to them, and still do. I talked about the experience I've had in business. So I've got a lot of friends, not only here, but internationally, that are in business as well. So I was able to find what was going on in other parts of the world. This morning I've spoken to a mate of mine who's in LA, for example. So each week I'm getting snippets from someone out of Singapore, someone out of the UK, or someone out of the US to find out what is going on. And I'm on the board of a company in the Netherlands, so I get an update from them as well, so on a weekly basis too. But we quickly worked out that we needed to be organised and prepared. So for the last 18 months, we've effectively been running as a campaign office in our media side. So at the height of it last year, we were caucusing every morning, and I think that was 6:30, and we shifted it depending on where it was, 6:30 a.m. It was my head of policy and advocacy, a guy called Dougal Murray. Dougal's moved on, and it's now Dylan Broomfield who fills that role. And my media team, it's now Chanel Pearson, who is now my chief of staff, but also sits in as the media as part of her. So we would come together and work out, okay, what's our narrative for the day? And sometimes it's A, sometimes it's B, sometimes it's actually we're quiet today. We just don't see the need to jump in. And then once a week, we would have a separate meeting where we would go and plan ahead. Where do we need to go? And then we go and get the evidence from our membership base to inform that decision in terms of where do we need to take the narrative. Because if you look at where we've been over the past 18 months, we've tried to play a role of optimism. We've tried to play a role of realism, and we've tried to play that piece that sits between the business needs and helping the government understand that, and then vice versa, helping the government message hit into our membership base as well, and just providing that simple matter-of-fact commentary. We made a decision early on that we will continue to be apolitical. We drew a line down the middle and made sure that we would stray only from that line a maximum of 20% either side. We wanted to be respectful, but we needed to speak out when we needed to. We were never going to be personal about it. We were going to highlight the issues and stay on those issues rather than get to a motive through it. And the feedback is it's worked well. My counsel to everybody, this doesn't happen by accident. We were planned. We're still planned. I'm natural, but I've got a good background in business, so I can talk to the issues. But we do spend a lot of time thinking through what it is that we're going to say and how we're going to say it.
There's lots that to dive into there and deep dive into, which we will through the chat. But first of all, you talked about setting the narrative each day and being ready. I'm sure during the whole time you've had stories from members. You've had members on the phone saying to you, this is happening, or we can't do this, or we've got this issue. How important has it been to have members tell their stories in a public sense to illustrate what you're trying to put across?
There's two parts there, Shannon. The first thing is I need to understand what their issue is before I can advocate on behalf of them. And there are some members that are happy to talk publicly. But in this day and age with the rise of social media, it's some people fear speaking out for the backlash they're going to cop on social media. So a lot of them were saying, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to go public, but we want you to have the story so that you can reference it when you're talking to the media. So I made myself available to our members. I made myself available to friends that were in business who were also members, and I made sure I was accessible, because the best thing I can do is be relevant with the issues and the information, so that I then have a choice. Do I do this publicly, or do I do it privately with the state or federal governments, or do I do both? So a lot of what I talk about publicly, I've already passed that on to either state or federal government, so that there's no surprise in terms of where we're going. I don't see the need to use the media as the baton, if you like. I see the media plays a really important part in the communications part, but equally, we've got to be active, and we can't just be lazy and expect the media to do our work for us. We've got a job to do with various people, inside of government as well as outside of government as well.
Most of the talk of Melbourne at the moment is about the government's roadmap. It's very obvious to us in kind of researching with this episode that you guys actually have your own roadmap as an alternative to the government's. And I guess from the perspective of creating your argument, how important is it to actually provide that alternate policy, not just so that people know what you're advocating for, but also so government know what you actually want?
Yeah, this comes from my business lens. Business owners and business leaders don't wait for something to happen. And I've done it because I've ran major businesses. We're thinking about what's coming, what's going on, and what could impact our business. You can only do that if you have an effective team as part of your organisation that are doing the day-to-day running, which then frees me up to think about where the organisation needs to go. Managing through COVID's been no different through that. And this role has been thinking about, okay, what's coming next? It's why I spend so much time talking to people outside of the organisation. It's why I spend so much time talking to people internationally about what is coming. So our narrative the whole way through has been really clear. There's times where we've agreed with the government and there's times where we've disagreed with the government, and that's state and federal. But at all times, we've put alternates up because it's my view, you're not here to just complain. You're here to make a difference. You're here to represent the members. And if the view from one group you disagree with, then I think you have the responsibility to put an alternate up so that you're referencing why you don't agree. It was interesting because that was some of the feedback that came from Treasurer Palace last year. It was like, you didn't always agree with us, but we appreciated that when you didn't, you told us and you gave us an alternate. He said there were many, many, many that didn't. And that's something that I reflect on and go, yeah, we did, and we'll continue to do that as well, because there's this is a 1 in 100 year pandemic. There isn't a right or a wrong way. We'll understand that in the rear view mirror. So it's about using the intelligence that we've got and the resources that we've got to help inform what is the best way forward for our constituents, our members.
That's interesting where you talk about it being measured, as in if we're going to criticise or we're going to be critical of something the government's done, we need to have something constructive to put forward. I think in industry bodies, it's always difficult to balance that with sometimes an angry members want for that sugar hit of go out and whack the government. How do you manage that balance to say that we don't want to just get something to make you happy today, we're doing something that's going to make you happy in 6-12 months' time?
Yeah, so I'm make the point, Shannon, that I'm here to represent the members, and that's not just for today, but that's long term. There's no point us standing up and getting to a position where the governments, either state or federal, won't engage with us, because if we're at that point, we can't represent our members. So it's got to be respectful along the way. I've learnt this through this role that it's a bit like a golf shot. A golf shot there's something in it for everybody. If it's a good shot, it's good for the person that's played it. If it's a bad shot, it's good for the person you're competing with. It's no different here. The feedback comes thick and thin. No matter what I say, it'll draw either praise or criticism. And that won't just be from our members. It'll be from state governments, oppositions, federal governments and oppositions, which is why it was important that we set the compass right from the start and we stick to that compass along the way. I've got to make sure that every night I can lie in bed to say I represented our members today and I did as good as I could. We put the case forward. We're going to win some in colloquial terms and we're going to lose some. But at least I know tomorrow I can get up and I can represent the members again. There
are obviously no winners in a pandemic. Like the reality right now is that everyone is losing. So I guess when we talk about what you guys are lobbying for, I think it seems to me that it's very subtle adjustments to that seesaw of how much we open up versus how much we shut down. Like you're not asking for us to just completely get rid of restrictions. So I guess one of the questions that I'm really interested in is how you weigh all of that up, and then how much do you actually think about the health advice in coming up with the recommendations that you're providing to government? How do you kind of factor that into the equation when you're obviously lobbying on behalf of business? And I think a lot of people see them as these kind of polar opposites who need two completely opposite things.
Yeah, so we think about it a lot because it's a balance, and it's a balance of business, community and health. In terms of, if I look at a continuum, on one end of the continuum is the absolute public health. And on the other end of the continuum is, if I call it February 2020 or business as usual. Now, we would argue that neither approach would have been right over the last 18 months. We would argue that the right approach has been to try and strike the middle. And that's to try and balance, health, the community and business, because eventually we're going to get out of this, and we can get out of it with something intact or nothing intact. It's not just about getting out of it with everybody being alive and healthy. It's about making sure that communities and businesses are healthy as well. We still think that we're playing in the half closest to public health. And so what we're wanting to do is bring that back to the centre and have that centre for a period where things stabilise, and they will, before we move back to what the new February 2020 is going to become, which is probably going to be sometime through next year. The way we do it is we do factor in the public health. We do listen to what we're hearing out of our health department, what the Premier is saying, what the federal government is saying, and there's been some good interventions along the way from both. But I step beyond that. I was lucky that I worked for the world's largest health organisation. One of the people that I worked for has just finished rolling out the United States vaccination program, working directly for President Biden. So I spoke to him. His name's Andy Slavitt. And so I got some insight from Andy in terms of, okay, what were you seeing over in the US? What comes next? What should we be looking out for over here? And we factored that in. We looked at what has worked in Victoria in terms of coming out of lockdowns. We're pretty good at this. We've come out of it 5 times, so we kind of know what we're doing. The National Cabinet framework was helpful in terms of 70% double and 80% double vaccinated people in terms of guidance. So we mapped where we'd been previously with previous restarts coming out of lockdowns against that 70 and 80%. And we used a variable at 80% single dose because we thought that could be a good incentive to actually help drive through to 80% double and beyond. And if you look at what we've done, it's very straightforward in terms of you will recognise all the parameters because we've lived through all these parameters before. And we think after 6 times, we don't need something new. We know what's worked. So let's apply that to the template. It so happens that New South Wales had released their roadmap, which was a little less aggressive than where we were, but along similar lines. So we had a position then that when they released theirs on the same day we released ours, they were uncannily close, which was also heartening for us to say, well, we're on the right track. Now, we're sympathetic to the potential rise in hospitalisation. I have a unique experience in the COVID in terms of I was lucky I didn't get hospitalised. Sadly, my son got COVID from me as well, but he was the only one out of my 2 children and wife in my family that got it. So we know the potential risk, but we also know that we've got a great health system here, and we also know that the state bought, I can't remember, it was either 2,000 or 4,000 ventilators and appropriate PPE equipment last year when we were in that flatten the curve phase. So our view has always been that we've got the equipment. Can we set up some temporary emergency hospitals? I know there's a room at the showgrounds because I helped build it last year, which would make a great temporary ward. All we then need is some health staff to be able to man that as well. And, either we get them from interstate or we import them from overseas. So what we're seeing, though, is that the modelling in different parts of the world, the actuals have never been as extreme as what the model showed. And that's what we're hoping for here as well, which, while we still come back to 70% double, 80% double, they're the targets for now. Let's hurry up and get there.
That roadmap, which even the early days of last year of our first lockdowns, you were quite vocal on wanting a roadmap. You talked a little bit about planning and how you work. I see this as trying to bring a message of business that in business you have to plan. Therefore, we need a roadmap. Has that been the Northern Star, everything you've been trying to communicate, that business needs to plan?
Yeah, correct. It's that certainty piece. We don't wait for the end product to adjust. So if you're building something, you don't get to the end of it and go, oh, gee, I wish that was red instead of green, or gee, there's a fault in that. We'll wait till we've got the finished product and find that there's a fault there. In business, there's checks along the way before you get to the end, and there's a reason for that. You want to catch the fault before it becomes too deep into the process. And that's why we believe so strongly in planning. And that's why we pushed. I'm glad you picked it up, Shannon. That's why we pushed for a roadmap back then, is because we needed, what is it that we're shooting for? What's the journey that we're on? What are the markers? Let's get them telegraphed so that everybody can line up. There was anger sort of spreading across different parts, and that roadmap actually helped bring all that anger and subside, because people would say, now we know what we're after. Okay, we've got to get to this and this and this. Now, the first iteration of the roadmap, we're happy to get the markers. We thought the markers were unrealistic, and we said as much, and we said why. But at least we then had a roadmap, and it's the same with this one. We now know what the roadmap is. We don't think the markers are right. We think when we look at New South Wales, and Victoria and New South Wales are separated by the Murray. Why are the readings so different one side of the Murray to the next? And if you looked at the landmass of Victoria and New South Wales together, we're less than Queensland, we're less than South Australia, we're certainly less than WA. So if you took our landmass and applied it in those jurisdictions, there would only be one setting. So our view was, given we're 4 weeks behind roughly where New South Wales are, business talks to business, right? And we talk to other businesses. Sometimes they're our competitors because we want to learn. Our view would be, we want governments to do the same, particularly through this pandemic, because there's a lot we can learn.
And so you've kind of mentioned there, like we can argue and talk about where the markers are set and what happens when we reach those vaccination targets. My question for you is, when you're encouraging people to go and get vaccinated, because we obviously want to hit the 70% and then the 80% double dose target, how do you think that businesses should approach the challenge of asking people to get vaccinated for their benefit? Is there kind of a playbook that you would shoot from?
Yeah, have your honest conversation. I mean, where do you sit on it as a leader? I've always been big on you have to be yourself every day you turn up to work. So as a leader, where do you sit on it? And if I was somebody that wasn't open to being vaccinated, I couldn't say what I said. And my view is the 70 and 80% targets are there. I've had COVID and I've been double vaccinated. So they tell me I've got some sort of supercharging in there now. Those that are hesitant, go and get the advice, but don't get the advice off Facebook or social media. Go and talk to your doctor. Go and get the real advice. We hosted a session with the Doherty Institute last night, and there'll be a recording available of that on our website. For anyone that's hesitant, go and listen to it. There are experts out there that will give you the insights as to what's there. It's, again, when I spoke to Andy Slavitt, I said, well, so tell me, mate, what about the vaccines? He said, I'll give you this simply, Paul. He said, taking a vaccine is better than not. He said, don't worry about the brand on it. They all work, because they all will keep you out of hospital, and they'll certainly, all stop you from getting gravely ill. So just take the first one that you can get. So that's a simple message for us. Go and get the advice that you need and take the vaccine. I went through it with my kids. They're 22, 20 and 18. So they're all adults. They can make their own decision. And they did. We talked about a lot, gave them my view, asked them to go and talk to their friends in other parts of the world as to what they took, and they eventually decided that they were going to take it, and they did. That's the first step. The second step now is reliant on government to come and help business, because it shouldn't be up to business to determine whether their parameter or their setting is going to need to be double vaxxed to enable people to come in. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The government has the ability through public health orders to make it easy for business to operate in environments where vaccinations are required. And I put it as simply as, when I was growing up, 14, 15, 16, I would have loved to go and have a beer in the pub. But I was 14, 15, 16. I needed to be 18 to be able to have a beer. That's the rule. That's the law. And no matter how much I would have begged the publican, they were not going to serve me a beer. And that's where we need to be with vaccination as well. We need to make it easy on business to be able to rule in or rule out. The second thing, and we've sought advice on this from the state, where does industrial manslaughter play in relation to COVID? Because if COVID is ruled in for industrial manslaughter litigation, then it's going to be difficult for any responsible officer of a company, whether it be CEO, CFO or director, to not bring in a mandate around double vaccination, because that's probably the only way that you can stop or be shown to be absolutely protective of your staff in the event that one of your staff members caught COVID from somebody coming into the workplace and suffering the ultimate. So there's a bit to play out here, but I think it starts as business leaders actually doing that leading. Saying, yes, we need to get there. We're tucking in with a 70 and 80% and beyond, because I think it needs to go beyond. Living that example, helping people get the information they need. And then as we're doing, working with the state to give us the guidance back in terms of, we need the protection here through public health orders, and then we need the guidance in terms of industrial manslaughter.
Even just the discussion about industrial manslaughter and other things, I'm sure they're things that you and your team are getting phone calls on every day as to what do we do with this thing? How are we going to approach this? That's not an easy thing to do. How do you balance that, servicing your members and potentially their frustrations, and some of them may well go outside the playbook? How do you balance that to still get the right outcome, to have the right relationship with government?
They're no different to all of us. I'm sure if you look back over the last 18 months, there would have been different days where we would have blown a fuse individually. My view is do it behind closed doors. Don't do it out in public. We're all got to let some steam off at different points in time. We called the vaccination issue back in March of this year. We said it would be, if not the biggest, one of the biggest issues of the year. That gives you a level of understanding of how far ahead we were thinking. And it's played out that way. We've met with a number of business leaders, be it from small, medium and large businesses. They've helped us inform a bigger view. We think there's 20 odd issues in relation to that, and we've written to the state government and federal government about those issues as well. When it comes to people getting frustrated about it, just ring me. I get it. And on Sunday afternoon, I took a number of calls, but was interesting. I had 4 very senior and respected people that I respect just ring me, and they got to the point of saying this is ridiculous, and didn't hold back. And it's good. That's what, through this, we need to rely on each other to get through. I need to know where they're coming from, and I don't take any of this sort of stuff personally. I'm there to help, and they know, and I'm grateful that they're comfortable enough to pick the phone up and ring and have a really difficult and sometimes robust conversation with me. Trust me, the politicians don't miss in that either. So I've had more than a handful of robust conversations along the journey, and it's just what it is. Everyone's trying to do the right thing. Everybody's trying to get to the right outcome. And sometimes you just need to unload on somebody. And I'm here for that as well.
So you mentioned a few times earlier in the chat that Victorians have recovered from COVID lockdowns on several occasions. And you've also mentioned that you tend to take an optimistic view of what the state is capable of. Are you optimistic about the prospects going forward out of this latest lockdown, or are you really, really concerned?
Oh, I'm more concerned the more lockdowns we have. The tail of the tape will show that at every lockdown, we drop off businesses. And even this one, it's, the financial support is there to an extent, but, we're going around a monopoly board here, right? And if you're lucky enough to get through the next week, you'll pick up, somewhere from, $2,000 to $20,000, depending on the size of your business. But this ends the same way that monopoly does. There can only be one winner. And so if you imagine a series of monopoly games going around the state, not all businesses are going to make it through because the costs are now exceeding the government support that is coming in. We weren't meant to be locked down for this long. There'll be businesses that will be making decisions around, we're not coming back. We're going to survive while the handouts are there. We might trade through Christmas, and then we're going to throw it in after that. It's got too difficult for some, whether it's physically difficult or whether it's emotionally difficult or whether it's just financially difficult. We know that day is coming. So what do we do about it? We spoke to the state and actually had that conversation with them. That is why the support is actually in place at the moment. I speak to other industry organisations. We've done a lot with the Australian Hotels Association, Paddy O'Sullivan here. We compare notes, and it was Paddy and I that went to the state to say we've got a problem in that there's no money in the kitty. They've exhausted their financial reserves. They've exhausted their emotional reserves. the state needs to stump up some cash to get businesses through as we go back into lockdown, and then stump up some cash as we go through restart again. And look, I can't give Minister Pakula, Minister Pulford and Treasurer Pallas enough credit and their departments for listening to the concerns and putting different things in place at different times, cash or mentoring programs as we did about this time last year as well. And I'd extend that to Treasurer Frydenberg and his team as well in terms of the access and the year that they've lent us and then the ability to act on that. But it's getting to the point of we've got to come out of this sooner rather than later in order to give business a chance. We're missing another event season when you think grand final and then spring carnival. So it's going to be difficult for that because I don't see anything until Boxing Day test, maybe. Australian Open, definitely. For the rest of us, it's about getting back and trading in a meaningful way before Christmas. And that's not just on the doorstep of Christmas. It's as long before we can so that people can start booking or can start planning, be it for a Christmas function or be it for a holiday in regional Victoria or wherever else you think you'll be able to go at that point in time. Then it's the longer term view. So we had this view, and I've seen it before, where I talk about this strategic planning, being deliberate about where you're going. So we came up with this concept of the Victoria Summit. And the idea is quite simple. Where will Victoria be in a decade, 2 decades, and 3 decades? And it was my view, and we talked through the team, that we agreed that if we're deliberate, we can get somewhere. If we're not, we'll be like a river and we'll just take the path of least resistance depending on what's there at a particular time. If you want some examples of it, go and have a look at Singapore, which is 54 years old, I think it is. What that city's done, what that country's done in 54 years by being deliberate is incredible. And there's other examples of this. Geelong, for an example, is just remarkable what they've done by being deliberate. So I spoke to a few people I respect and I said, yep, good idea, we're in. Well, I haven't even thought of anything. Yeah, you'll think of it. Just pull it together and we'll be right. So what morphed out of a couple of conversations turned into the Victoria Summit. We put a reference group together, and I was blown away by the support of people. And then you can jump on www.victoriasummit.com.au, have a look at the calibre of people in the reference group, and then have a look at the calibre of people in the working group to give you an understanding that these are the leaders of the state coming together in a collaborative sense, and that they're truly the leaders of the state from all walks of life. From, we've got Luke Hilakari from Trades Hall, we've got vice chancellors from a number of the universities there, some of the doyens of industry. We've got Penny Fowler from Herald and Weekly Times on there, as well, News Corp on there as well. And it is amazing that no one said no. Everybody said, yes, we want to be a part of this and we want to contribute our time. And it's been remarkable seeing the collaboration come together from people that haven't met before, from people that you would say might have different views. The conversations have been respectful but robust, and we're starting to get to the point of we're getting some really nice ideas out of it. A really great endorsement. We've had both treasurers address us at the last public day. At the next public day in a couple of weeks, we've got 4 of the past 5 living premiers that will address the group on the day. So unfortunately, only Dennis Napthine can't be with us on the day, but Jeff Kennett, Ted Baillieu, Steve Bracks and John Brumby are all going to address this in terms of what we should be thinking about as we look into the future. I'm very excited by that.
One final thing, and you talked a little bit about before where things were fractured last year, and it feels like in this week that we're talking, things are just a little bit fractured. How important, and I'm not just talking about in the pandemic sense, but in a broader communication sense for an organisation like yours, how important is it to have a goal for people to go towards to get them on the one track?
Yeah, it's fundamental, particularly right now. Sunday and yesterday probably felt as dark as we'd felt for the better part of 12 months. And there are a couple of things that happened. Certainly, Saturday and the clashes with police. No one needs to see that. We don't want to see that. That's not our society. And there was some footage that I would think everybody would have seen yesterday, and then again today, some protests. That's not our city. That's not our state. That's not where we want to be. But it talks to the the boiling point I think that people have got to in terms of we just want to get out of this. We don't want to be locked down anymore. We want to get back on with our lives. So having something to look forward to, I call it the North Star, is fundamentally important. And everyone's going to have a different one. My son's year 12. He just wants to get back to school to see his mates because he knows he's got 3 weeks left of his whole schooling life with his mates left. And if he's already missed so much, he wants to be able to see them and spend the last days at high school with them. I've got staff that kids are at home. They know they've missed out on learning. We all want to get away. Some of us have been lucky enough to travel, be it locally or internationally. We all want to get away again. We're all craving for what we've lost. And we want to find a resemblance and we want an understanding of when we can get that back. And from a business perspective, we're at crisis points now. We don't want to be in this crisis. And the way we know to get out of it, we don't live on handouts. We go into business because we want to make a difference. We either want to make a product and sell it or have a service and provide that as well. We want to embrace customers. We want to embrace staff. And most of us are stopped from doing that right now. And we just want to get to the point of being able to do that. That's why the goalposts are so important, because that's what we're shooting for.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Paul. I wish you and businesses all the best and your constituents all the best over the next couple of months, and hoping there's an opportunity for us to have you in the Michaelson Alexander office in person at some point in the future.
I look forward to that. Jack, thanks for having me, and to you, Shannon, thanks for having me as well.
Our absolute pleasure. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, stay tuned to your podcast feeds for our next episode about COVID-19 recovery with Jen Hewitt from the AFR, which will be out a few days after this one. Thanks, everyone.